The briefcase was sitting alone on the floor of a stalled elevator at 4 in the morning, and inside it was $90,000 in banded cash. Imani Boyd found it on the 7th floor of the Calderwood Tower, where she pushed a mop bucket down a marble corridor that no one else was awake to see. She had been cleaning that building for 2 years. She knew the hum of its dead air system, the flicker of the third light panel by the freight doors, the smell of cold coffee left in 100 locked offices. She did not know whose life she was about to hold in her 2 tired hands. She had pressed the call button for the service elevator and waited because the service elevator was slow and she was carrying 40 pounds of supplies. When the doors opened, the car had jolted to a stop between floors and frozen there with its lights buzzing, and on the floor of that frozen car sat a slim, black leather briefcase, upright as if someone had set it down for 1 second and meant to come right back. She stood there with her hand on the mop. She looked up and down the empty corridor. There was no one. There was never anyone. Not at that hour. She was alone with a stranger's briefcase, and her shift had 4 more hours in it, and her bus pass had 2 rides left, and her rent was 11 days late. She knelt down. She turned the latches because a person has to know what they are dealing with before they decide what to do, and the latches gave with a soft double click, and the lid lifted, and the money looked up at her. It was banded in straps of hundreds, neat as bricks, more money than she had seen in one place in her entire life. There was no name on the outside of the case. There was a single folded paper tucked against the cash, and a small brass key, and nothing else. Imani Boyd, 31 years old, a single mother who had eaten cereal for dinner 3 nights that week so her daughter would not have to, looked at $90,000 that nobody in the world knew she had found. And the first thing she felt, God help her, was not greed. It was fear. Because she knew, the way you know weather is coming, that money like that did not stay quiet. Money like that came looking for whoever touched it last. She closed the lid. She did not close it slowly, the way a person does when they are tempted. She closed it the way you shut a door on a fire. Then she carried it, and her mop bucket, and her whole steady heart, down the stairwell to the night security desk, and she set it on the counter in front of a man half asleep over a crossword, and she said the thing that would change her life without her knowing it. She said, somebody lost this, and it needs to go back to them. To understand why a woman with 11 days of overdue rent did that without a flicker, you have to go back, the way the story has to go back, to the small apartment on Halstead Court where Imani lived with her daughter and the ghost of everything she was trying to outrun. Her daughter was named Toby. She was 6 years old, gap-toothed and serious, with 2 puffballs of hair that Imani redid every morning at the bathroom mirror before the sun came up. Toby liked to line her crayons up by color before she used a single one. She called the moon the night sun. She did not yet know that her mother worked while she slept and slept while she was at school, that the warm body she climbed into bed beside at dawn had been awake all night scrubbing a city she would never be invited into. Imani had grown up 2 neighborhoods over, raised by a grandmother named Estelle, who cleaned houses and never once let Imani believe that cleaning a house was a small thing to be. You leave a place better than you found it, Estelle used to say, even if no one ever knows your name. You especially leave it better when no one knows your name. That is the only kind of good that counts. Estelle had been gone 4 years now. The chair she used to sit in was still by Imani's window, because Imani could not bring herself to give it away. The father of Toby was gone too, in the way that did not involve dying, which is the kind of gone that does not let you grieve cleanly. He had left when Toby was 2 and he sent nothing, and Imani had stopped expecting anything from him so completely that his name had become just a fact about the weather, a thing that had happened to her once. So it was Imani and Toby and the empty chair and a rent of $940 a month that took everything she had and a little she did not. She worked the overnight cleaning shift at Calderwood Tower for $13 an hour. The shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, and the math of it was cruel. She paid a neighbor, Miss Roselle, from down the hall, $8 a night to keep Toby sleeping in the next apartment, so Imani could go scrub the offices of people who made more in an hour than she made in a week. She came home at 6:15, carried her sleeping daughter back across the hall, lay down for 2 hours, then got up to walk Toby to school. She slept again badly in the afternoon. She did it 5 nights a week and sometimes 6, and she had done it for 2 years, and she had never once been late. She knew the building better than the people who owned it. She knew that the coffee machine on 9 leaked if you let the carafe sit, so she emptied it every night before it could stain the counter. No one would ever thank her for keeping clean. She knew that the man in the corner office on 11 kept a photograph of 2 children turned face down when he works late, and she never moved it, only dusted around it, because some things are not yours to touch, even when they are in your hands. She knew which trash cans held the heartbreak of the building, the torn-up letters, the prescription bottles, the takeout for 1 at midnight, and she carried all of it down the freight elevator without ever once treating any of it as gossip. Estelle had taught her that too. You see everything, her grandmother used to say, and you say nothing. Because a cleaning woman who keeps her mouth shut is the most trusted person in any house, and trust is the only inheritance a poor woman gets to leave. The work was hard on her body in ways she did not talk about. Her hands had cracked in the winter from the bleach and the cold water, and she rubbed petroleum jelly into them every dawn, and slept with cotton gloves on so they would not split open while she carried her daughter. Her back had a knot in it the size of a fist from the mop and the bins and the bending, and she had learned to ignore it the way you learn, to ignore a clock that ticks too loud. She was 31 years old, and some mornings she moved like a woman of 60, and then Toby would wrap 2 small arms around her neck in the grey light, and the knot would not matter, because the knot was the price of the arms, and Imani had decided long ago that it was a price worth paying without complaint. Her supervisor was a man named Dale Quint, who ran the cleaning contract for the building and wore a lanyard like it was a badge of office. Dale Quint had a way of looking at his crew that made them feel he was counting them. He kept a clipboard. He timed their breaks. He spoke to Imani and the other cleaners, most of them women, most of them immigrants, or single mothers, in the flat-clipped tone of a man who had decided long ago that the people who held the mops were the people who could not be trusted with anything more. "You missed a smudge on 4, Dale would say, holding the door of the supply closet so she had to wait. "You think nobody notices? Somebody always notices." She did not raise her voice to Dale Quint. She did not need to. She wiped the smudge he claimed to see, the one that was not there, and she said, "Thank you for letting me know." And she went back to work, because that was the dignity Estelle had left her, the dignity of a woman who would not let a small man make her small. What Imani did not know on the night she found the briefcase was that the owner of it had spent the worst 6 hours of his year looking for it, and that the search would end at her shift. His name was Howard Settle, and he was 54 years old, and he owned a regional building supply company that ran lumber and concrete and steel to half the construction sites in 3 counties. He had built it from 1 truck and a rented yard. He employed 400 people, and most of them did not know that the man whose name was on their checks had grown up in a single wide trailer with a mother who waited tables and a coffee can on the counter where every spare dollar went. The $90,000 was not glamour money. It was payroll. Howard's company ran on thin margins and an old-fashioned habit, inherited from his mother, of paying certain crews in cash on Fridays, the smaller subcontractor crews who did not have bank accounts that worked the way bank accounts were supposed to. His controller had pulled the cash on Thursday. Howard had taken the briefcase himself because that was the kind of man he was, the kind who did not hand the important thing to someone else. And he had carried it to a late dinner meeting on the 11th floor of Calderwood Tower with a man who wanted to sell him a fleet of trucks. And somewhere in the long evening, in the rush of a phone call about his mother, who was 81 and had fallen, Howard Settle had set the briefcase down beside him in the service corridor while he argued with a nurse on the phone, and he had walked away from it, and he had not remembered it until he was 2 miles gone, and his blood ran cold. He came back. He drove the 2 miles back with his hands tight on the wheel and a sweat on him that had nothing to do with the heat, and when he reached Calderwood Tower, the glass doors were locked and the lobby was dark, except for the green glow of an exit sign and the small lamp at the security desk. He pounded on the glass with the flat of his hand until a night guard looked up from his crossword. He pressed his face close and said, loud enough to carry through the door, "I left something in there. I need to come up. It is important. Please." The guard came to the glass but did not unlock it. The night guard, the same man half asleep over a crossword, had told him through the glass that he could not let anyone in at that hour. Contract rules, no exceptions, not for anybody, but that he would log it and someone would call him. Howard had stood there with his palms flat on the cold glass, a grown man who ran 400 jobs, locked out of a building by a tired man with a crossword and a rulebook, and he had understood for the first time in a long while what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a locked door with no key and no name that mattered. He left his number on a slip of paper pressed against the glass. Then he got back in his truck. So Howard Settle drove home and did not sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with the lights off and did the kind of math a man does when $90,000 of other people's wages has vanished into a building he no longer had keys to. He thought about the crews who would line up Friday. He thought about his mother in the hospital. He thought about the long odds that a slim black case full of cash, left in a tower cleaned overnight by strangers, would ever be seen again. He had no idea that it had already been found. He had no idea that the woman who found it had carried it straight to the security desk before the temptation could even finish forming. That she had not counted it, had not skimmed it, had not so much as slid a single band of hundreds into the pocket of her uniform. He had no idea that the building he could not buy his way into at midnight was at that very moment being kept honest by a woman he had never met, working for $13 an hour. The night guard's name was Purnell, and Purnell had been at the desk for 9 years, and he was not a bad man, only a tired one. When Imani set the briefcase on his counter, he looked at it and then at her, and the first thing he said was not, "Thank you." The first thing he said was, "You open it." She told him she had to see if there was a name, and there wasn't only the money. She told him exactly how much it looked like, 90,000 or near it. She could not be sure. She told him she had touched nothing else. Purnell looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes. Some old reflex that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with every assumption he had ever absorbed about who takes and who gets blamed. Then he reached under the desk and brought up the incident log and a pen, and he said, "All right," and his voice had gone careful, and Imani understood. The way you understand a chill. That, being honest, had just made her the most suspected person in the building. She signed the log, she wrote the time, 4:11 in the morning, and the floor, 7, and a short line, found leather briefcase containing cash installed service elevator, turned in immediately, did not remove any contents. Purnell locked the briefcase in the security cage behind him, the one with the steel mesh, and he called the after-hours number for the building manager. And Imani went back to work because there were 3 more floors to clean, and the work did not stop just because the world had gotten heavy. She mopped the 7th floor again. She emptied the bins on 6. She wiped the long glass of the lobby until it showed her nothing but her own reflection, a tired woman in a navy uniform with her name stitched over the heart, and she thought about Toby sleeping across the hall in Miss Roselle's apartment, and she thought about the rent, and she did not let herself think about the money, because the money was no longer hers. To think about, it never had been. And the truth, the honest truth, she would only admit to herself much later, was that for 1 second in that frozen elevator, she had thought about it. Not the way Dale Quint would have imagined, not as a plan, but as a flash, a single hot image of the rent paid and Toby in new shoes, and the serial nights ended, and it had come and gone in the space of a breath. That was the part nobody understood about honesty. It was not the absence of the wanting. The wanting was real, and the wanting had teeth. Honesty was what you did in the half-second after the wanting, when no one was there to see which way you would go. Imani had felt the want, and she had closed the lid anyway, and that, Estelle would have said, was worth more than a woman who never wanted at all. She prayed a little while she mopped, not in words exactly, just the old habit of turning her tiredness over to something larger, the way her grandmother had hummed hymns over a scrub bucket 60 years before. Lord, she thought, let it go back to whoever needs it, and let my child sleep, and let me get through this shift. And that was the whole of it, and it was enough. The mop went back and forth across the marble, and the city outside the long glass began, very slowly, to turn from black to the bruised blue of almost morning. At 5:40 the building manager arrived, a brisk woman named Lorna Pace, who had been pulled from her bed and was not happy about it. She reviewed the log, she looked at the briefcase through the steel mesh, she asked Pernell who found it, and Pernell pointed at Imani, and Lorna Pace turned to look at the cleaning woman the way people in suits look at people in uniforms as a category before a person. And then Dale Quint arrived, because someone had called him too, and Dale Quint took one look at the situation and saw, not a crisis to be managed honestly but a chance to be the man in charge. He did not ask Imani if she was all right. He did not say it was good of her to turn it in. Stood in the lobby with his lanyard and his clipboard, and he said in front of Lorna, Pace and Pernell and two early arriving office workers the thing that the whole story had been bending toward. He said, "How do we know she didn't take some first?" The lobby went quiet. Imani felt the question land in her chest like a stone dropped into a well. She had carried $90,000, she could have disappeared into the night, and she had walked it straight to the desk, and now a man with a clipboard was asking, front of everyone, whether she was a thief. She did not raise her voice. She had promised Estelle's memory. She never would. She said every dollar that was in that case is in that case. Count it. Dale Quint smiled the small smile of a man who thinks he has won. He said they would count it. He said the police would count it. He said if so much as one band was light, she would be the first person they looked at, and the only one because she was the one whose hands had been in it. What Dale Quint did not know, what none of them knew, was that the owner of the briefcase was already in his truck on the highway, having gotten the call from Lorna Pace at 5:50 in the morning, and that he was driving toward Calderwood Tower faster than the law allowed, and that he had heard, in the building manager's careful voice, two facts at once, that his payroll had been found and that the woman who found it was about to be treated like she had stolen it. Howard Settle had spent his whole life around men like Dale Quint. He had been the boy with the wrong shoes. He had been the young man told he did not have the look they wanted at the front desk. He had built 400 jobs, partly so that no one who worked for him would ever stand in a lobby and be made small by a man with a clipboard. And now a woman he had never met had saved his payroll and his Friday and, quite possibly, his standing with the only crews he could not afford to lose, and she was being called a thief for it. He pressed harder on the gas. The sun was coming up over the city as Imani's shift ended at 6. Normally she would have clocked out and gone to carry her daughter home. Instead, Lorna Pace asked her to stay until the owner arrived, and Dale Quint made it sound like an order, and so Imani stood in the lobby in her navy uniform, exhausted, her feet aching, 16 hours of need pressing down on her, and she waited to be either thanked or accused, and she genuinely did not know which it would be. She called Miss Roselle. She said she was sorry, she was going to be late. Could Roselle walk Toby to school? Miss Roselle, who was 70 and kind, said, "Of course, baby, you take care of whatever it is." And Imani stood by the glass and watched the morning traffic and thought, this is what honesty costs. An extra hour on aching feet and the long humiliation of being doubted, and she would have done it again. She knew she would have done it again. That was the part that the men with clipboards never understood about women like her. At 6:40, a mud-spattered work truck pulled up to the gleaming entrance of Calderwood Tower, parked crooked across two spaces, and a big man in a canvas jacket and steel-toed boots got out and walked fast through the glass doors, and the whole calculus of the lobby changed. He did not look like $90,000. That was the first thing. He looked like a man who had not slept, like a man who had been at a hospital, like a foreman. Dale Quint, who had been expecting someone in a suit, hesitated. And, in his hesitation, he made the second mistake of the morning. He stepped forward, put on his official voice, and said, "Sir, I'm the supervisor here. We have a security matter. I'll need to walk you through our procedure for the recovered item." Howard Settle looked at him. Then he looked past him, around the lobby until his eyes found the only person in the room wearing a cleaner's uniform, the woman standing apart with her hands folded and her chin up and exhaustion all over her. And he knew, the way you know a true thing without being told, that she was the one. He said, ignoring Dale Quint completely, "Are you the one who found my case?" Imani said she was. He crossed the lobby, he did not shake Dale Quint's hand. He walked past the building manager. He stopped in front of Imani, this big rough man who ran lumber to half the county, and for a moment he could not speak, because the relief and the shame of it closed his throat. $90,000. Other people's wages. A whole week of trust he had nearly lost in a service corridor while his mother lay in a hospital bed, and here it was, kept safe by a woman who had every reason in the world to keep a little for herself and had not. He asked her if she had opened it. She told him she had. To find a name, and there was none. She told him she had touched nothing but the latch and the lid. She told him it was in the cage, and that it had not left her sight until the guard locked it, and that if there was $1 missing, she would account for it. But there was not $1 missing, because she had not taken $1. Dale Quint, who could not help himself, said from behind, "That's what they all say. Sir, we'll want to count it first before anyone goes anywhere." And Howard Settle turned slow and looked at Dale Quint for the first time as a person and not an obstacle, and he said one quiet sentence that ended the man's morning. He said, "I trust her more than I trust you, and I haven't known either of you 10 minutes. They counted it anyway, because that was the procedure, and procedure has its uses. They counted it on the security counter, with Lorna Pace and Purnell watching. Band after band of hundreds laid out under the fluorescent light. $90,000. Every band, every bill, not $1 light. Imani watched them count it and felt no triumph, only the slow loosening of a fear she had been carrying since 4 in the morning, the fear of a poor woman who knows that her innocence is the only thing she owns and that other people get to decide whether to believe it. When the last band was counted and the number matched, the lobby was silent in a different way than before. Dale Quint had gone the colour of old paper. Purnell was looking at his shoes. Lorna Pace cleared her throat and said something about being glad it had worked out. Howard Settle was not looking at any of them. He was looking at Imani's name, stitched in white thread over the heart of her navy uniform, and something in his face had changed, gone, still and strange, as if he had seen a word he did not expect. He said her last name out loud, slow, like he was tasting it. Boyd. He asked her if her people were from the east side. From the old Macklin Street blocks, the ones they tore down for the highway. She said her grandmother had been, that her grandmother had cleaned houses out of a little place on Macklin before it all came down. She said her grandmother's name had been Estelle. And Howard Settle, who ran lumber to half the county, who had not cried in front of another human being in 30 years, put his hand over his mouth and stood there in the lobby of Calderwood Tower at 7 in the morning, while the truth arrived, all at once. Because he had known an Estelle Boyd. When he was 9 years old and his mother was waiting tables double shifts, and there had been a winter his family nearly went under, there had been a woman 2 doors down on Macklin Street, a house cleaner, who had brought a pot of beans and rice across the alley every Sunday for an entire winter, and never once called it charity. She called it extra. She said she always made too much. She made too much on purpose, every Sunday, for a family she was not related to, because a child 2 doors down was hungry, and that was reason enough. That woman had kept Howard Settle alive through a winter in the quiet way that the people who hold the mops keep the world alive, the way that never gets a name on a building. And he had spent 45 years not knowing how to thank a woman who was gone, and now her granddaughter was standing in front of him in a $13 an hour uniform, having just refused to take a single bill of his money. He told her. He stood in the lobby and he told her, his voice breaking on the simplest words, about the beans and rice across the alley, about the winter, about a child who would not have made it without a house cleaner named Estelle who said she always made too much. Imani listened, and her hand came up to her mouth, and the tears came down without a sound, because she had grown up on stories of her grandmother feeding the block, and she had never known. One of those plates had grown into the man standing in front of her. What she did not know, that no one watching could have known either, was that the story was not over, that a return of $90,000 and a memory of beans and rice was only the hinge of it, and that the rest of Imani Boyd's life was about to turn on a Tuesday morning in a marble lobby. Howard Settle asked her how long she had worked there. 2 years, she said. He asked what she made. She told him, because there was no shame in it, $13 an hour. He asked if she had family, and she told him about Toby, 6 years old, 2 puffballs of hair, asleep across the hall right now in a neighbor's apartment because that was the only way the math worked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked her the question that mattered, the one he had been turning over since the count came out even. He asked, if I offered you a reward for returning this, would you take it? And Imani Boyd, standing on her aching feet at the end of a 16-hour fear, looked at the man and said, the thing that told him everything. Estelle had told him 45 years before. She said, I didn't return it for a reward. I returned it because it wasn't mine. You don't have to pay me, to be honest. My grandmother would climb out of her grave. Howard Settle laughed, a wet broken laugh, and he wiped his face with the back of his big rough hand, and he said, no, ma'am, I don't suppose she would. Then he did not offer her a reward. He understood in the way that the title of a kind man is earned and not given, that a reward would have been an insult to what she was, would have turned her grandmother's lesson into a transaction. He understood that you do not pay a woman like that. You see her, you lift her, you give her not a handout, but a door. So he did not reach for his wallet. He reached instead for his phone, and he stepped a few feet away and he made a call to his controller, and the people in the lobby heard only fragments. A name, a question about an opening, the words full benefits and steady days and a child in school. When he came back, Dale Quint had gathered himself enough to try one more time to be in charge. He said, Sir, if there's nothing further, I do need to get my crew back on schedule. This one is already past her clock out. Howard Settle looked at Dale Quint, and then he looked at Imani, and he made a decision that he would later say was the easiest he had made in years. He said to Imani, not to Dale, you do not work for this man anymore. He said his company kept its own buildings now, 3 of them, a yard office and 2 warehouses, and he had been looking for someone to run the front of the main yard office. Someone who showed up, someone honest to the bone, someone he could trust with a cash drawer and the crews and the early Friday mornings. He said it paid $22 an hour to start, with full benefits, with daytime hours, with a real schedule a mother could plan a child's life around. He said he had spent the whole drive over there terrified about $90,000, and the truth was he would have paid all of it, just to put the right person in that chair, and the right person had just told him she would not take $1 to be decent. He said, come run my front office, 8 to 5, home before your daughter's off the bus. I will not have it said that the granddaughter of Estelle Boyd cleaned offices overnight, while a man whose life her people saved looked the other way. Imani Boyd, who had walked into that lobby a suspect and was walking out an offer of a life, did not answer right away. She looked at the empty chair she could not see, the one by her window 2 miles away, where Estelle used to sit. She looked at the navy uniform with her name over the heart. And then she said yes in a voice that barely worked, and she said thank you. And Howard Settle shook her hand the way you shake the hand of an equal, firm and unhurried, and it was the first time in 2 years that anyone in that building had touched her like she was a whole person. The story could have ended there in the lobby, with the offer. The kind of justice this world keeps a ledger for does not stop at the reward, though it also collects. Lorna Pace, the building manager, had watched the whole thing, and Lorna Pace was not a cruel woman, only a busy one, and busy people sometimes need a thing put in front of them before they will see it. She had seen it now. She drew Dale Quint aside, and the early workers in the lobby could not hear the words, but they could see Dale Quint's face, and they could see the lanyard he was so proud of, and they could read the shape of a man being told that his contract was being reviewed, that the building had received concerns about how he spoke to his crew, that a woman he had publicly accused of theft in front of witnesses had just been hired by the very owner whose property she returned. Dale Quint did not get fired in the lobby that morning. The world does not always work that fast. And this was never going to be a story of vengeance. Within the month, though, his contract for Calderwood Tower was not renewed, and the reason that went around among the cleaning crew, the women with the mops who notice everything, was that he had called the honest one a thief in front of the man who knew better. The women told that story to each other for a long time after, in the supply closet, in the language of people who finally got to watch the right thing happen. They did not gloat. They did not need to. They just told it the way you tell a true thing, and let it carry its own weight. Imani gave her notice that morning. In the lobby, the simplest resignation in the history of the building. She handed Dale Quint her badge and her keys. And she did not say anything sharp because Estelle had not raised her to kick a man who was already going down. She just said, "I left it better than I found it every night I was here, and you know that's true." And Dale Quint, to whatever small credit he had left, did not argue because he did know it was true. She started at the yard office 2 weeks later after she had given Calderwood the notice she owed even the people who had doubted her because that was who she was. She wore plain business casual now instead of a uniform, and she sat at a desk by a window that looked out on a yard stacked with lumber and steel, and she learned the names of the crews and the rhythm of the Friday cash and the particular way Howard Settle said good morning, which was the same way to everyone. The foreman and the controller and the woman who ran his front office, all of them spoken to as people. The pay changed everything, and it changed nothing. It changed the rent, which got paid on the 1st. Now early, the way she had always wanted to pay it. It changed dinner, which became dinner, and not cereal. It changed the afternoons because Imani slept at night now, in her own bed, and was awake and standing at the bus stop when Toby came home from school. And Toby, who had never in her short life had her mother waiting at the bus stop, ran the last 20 feet every single day like it was a holiday. It did not change who Imani was. She still left every place better than she found it. She still kept Estelle's chair by the window. She still made too much food on Sundays on purpose because a girl 2 floors down was being raised by a tired grandmother, and Imani always seemed to make too much, and she never once called it charity. She called it extra. Toby asked her once in the new apartment with the 2nd bedroom why she always cooked so much on Sundays. And Imani knelt down to her daughter's height, the way Estelle used to kneel to hers, and she said, "Because a long time ago your great-grandmother made too much for a hungry boy across an alley, and that boy grew up and remembered, and that is why we live where we live and eat what we eat. So we keep making too much. That's how it works. You feed the block, and the block remembers, even when you're gone." Toby thought about that, serious as she always was, lining up her crayons by colour on the new kitchen table. Then she said, "Like the night sun. You can't always see it, but it's still there." And Imani said, "Yes, baby, exactly like that." Howard Settle came by the yard office on a Friday near the end of that first year to do the thing he did every Friday, which was hand the smaller crews their cash himself because his mother had taught him that you do not let a man's wages pass through too many hands. His mother was out of the hospital by then, 81 and stubborn, and she had asked to meet the woman from the lobby, the granddaughter of the house cleaner who had fed them through that winter. So one Sunday, Imani brought a pot of beans and rice to a house she had never been to, and an old woman who had been a young waitress on Macklin Street took her hands and held them and could not let go, and the two of them sat at a kitchen table and cried over a recipe that had crossed an alley 50 years before and come all the way back around. There was no briefcase in that kitchen. There was no reward, no check, no ledger, no count of hundreds under a fluorescent light. There was only a pot of beans cooling on the stove and 2 women holding hands and a 6-year-old girl in the next room lining up crayons by colour, and the long, quiet proof that a kindness done in a cold winter by a woman whose name was on no building had kept its appointment across half a century and shown up. Finally, to pay. Imani Boyd had returned a briefcase with $90,000 in it because it was not hers, and she had asked for nothing, and the world, which keeps a longer memory than anyone gives it credit for, had handed her back a life. Not as a prize. As a debt. A debt her grandmother's plates of beans had quietly placed in the ledger of a hungry child, long ago on a street that is not there anymore. And if you have ever done the right thing in an empty room at 4 in the morning with nobody watching and no reward in sight, then you already know what Estelle knew, what Imani learned, what Toby was just beginning to understand at the new kitchen table. The good you do when no one is looking is the only kind that comes all the way back. That was the part the men with clipboards never understood. They thought the ledger was the money. They thought it was the count of hundreds under the light. The real ledger was older than that and slower and surer, and it had Estelle Boyd's name in it, and it was finally, on a Friday near a yard full of lumber, paid in full. Toby kept the empty chair when she was grown. She moved it from apartment to apartment the way her mother had, and she never quite knew why, except that it had been her great-grandmother's. And you keep the chair, and you make too much food on Sundays, and you leave every place better than you found it, even if no one ever knows your name. Especially when no one knows your name. That, she would tell her own children one day, is the only kind of good that counts.